Hello, I am Barendipitous with my TTRPG shelf, and here I have the Old Gods of Appalachia role-playing game. This is the most recent acquisition of to our tabletop role-playing game shelf. Um, Basically, and this is my first. This is the first physical book that I've gotten for the Cipher system, the Monte Cook Games Cipher system. Um, if you're not familiar with Monte Cook Games, they make a lot of really cool things, and most, if not all, of their like tabletop role playing game products focus on a game system they created called the Cipher system, which um, it's been a while since I've played in that. I have played Numenera. I haven't run Numenera yet, but I have played in a couple of adventures in that. Um, and this is one of their this is in that same cipher system, but it's the reason why my wife and I got this book was uh, Old Gods of Appalachia is the name of a horror anthology podcast by Deep Nerd Media, and my wife and I love this podcast. It is a real it, like you know we're kind of suckers for both of us are suckers for good good horror writing and good horror podcasts. The idea behind the Old Gods of Appalachia show, the podcast itself, is so if you're familiar with what Appalachia is, it is a region in the United States, the eastern United States. Let me try to find in here. There's a map of it if I can find where that might be. Maybe it's like okay. I guess it's further down in the book here. Let's try 179 here. Yeah, Appalachia is a region in the U.S. that essentially is it's a mountainous region near the east coast of the United States. Here we go. Okay. So this is kind of what the region looks like. You got, let's see, if you're familiar with, so like Washington, D.C. would be, I think, maybe like around here. Oh gosh, I can't quite tell. We got the Virginias around here. I think Maryland would be, maybe this is farther south or something. You got like the Carolinas here. Up like New York and stuff would be kind of up here in this area, but like Appalachia is this area like in the Virginias, Tennessee, Kentucky, and that area basically. And this podcast is set in an alternative version of Appalachia, where there are mysterious dark forces that sleep beneath the mountains, and those dark forces are strong enough to influence the flora, the fauna, the flora, the fauna, and the people who that reside in this area. Basically, it is, and the podcast is created by people from that region. In fact, if you were to listen to an episode of Old Gods of Appalachia, like instantly you can hear that sort of you might call it a southern drawl, although it's an Appalachian kind of like it's specifically an Appalachian accent. Old Gods of Appalachia or something like I butchered that, I'm sure I did. But yeah, so generally in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, mostly early 1900s is when this would take place. If you're let's see, as far as like, if you're familiar with things like the Blair Witch Project, that is, I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but that kind of folk horror, like, scary things out in the woods, that kind of aesthetic, that kind of like genre, so to speak, that kind of like folk horror is a general term for it. That's what you'll find here. Everything you need to play this game is contained in this book. Really beautiful art and everything, and the people and the Monte Cook Games who made this book, they worked very closely with the people who make the podcast. And so my wife and I really wanted to, since we love the podcast and we found that this tabletop role-playing game was made, we wanted to have it, to be able to have adventures in the world of this podcast that we love. And so yeah, neither my wife nor I have any like we're not from Appalachia. We are not at all. We've almost never really been out there. So it really is just kind of a um, you know we really like these sort of like the mythology and the folk legend and stuff that come from there. This first section talks about well, first of all, it talks about like the game itself and the podcast it's based on. It talks about creating a character in the Cipher system. You basically create a character that the way you create a character is based on a sentence. Your character is an adjective, noun, that verbs. And the adjective gives you certain mechanical ability, certain abilities. The noun is kind of like the sort of class that you have, and then the verb is additional abilities as well. So, for example, so descriptor would be the adjective, right? So you can be like a beholden something, a clumsy something, um, dishonorable or cursed or graceful, and so on and so forth, right? Earlier, there were sort of these different classes, so to speak, like explorer and protector. So you could say something like you are an industrious protector who something. Focus is the last part of it. So like uh, an industrious protector who applies himself, an industrious protector who calls home the hounds, and each of these actually have like specific like skills and abilities tied with them, and so that sentence embodies your character in a narrative sense, but also kind of informs what sorts of things you're able to do in this world. Um, so that's pretty much how the cipher system works, and so all these different like descriptors and classes and foci, whatever, um, are the ones in this book are of course specific to this book. This talks about the rules, and I know there are some mechanics, like more horror, like folk horror mechanics that are unique to this setting, to this game. It talks about you can spend experience points, and so on and so forth. And then there's a very long section that talks about the world. Basically, what is Pennsylvania like? Kentucky, the Virginias, and North Carolina, and all that kind of stuff. It gives you so much to help you understand, especially if you're not from Appalachia, like myself. It gives you so much to help you understand the kinds of culture, the kinds of stories that you can make in here and have it be authentic. One thing that there's a lot some as far as like some of the things that really fascinate me is that there are in the podcast, at least my wife and I finished season 2 so far. We're getting into season 3 pretty soon, so we have some catching up to do. Because as of this recording, I know season 3 is pretty much complete. I think they might be on season 4 at this point, but anyway, some of the stuff that's been fascinating me is sort of like so. There's of course people who sort of like live in the land and like live in the forest and like treat the land well and things like that. But then there are also these mining companies and the railroad company, and they're like digging deep and delving into these dark things, and there's a lot of like greed and destruction that comes from that. But then also there's a lot of destruction that comes from like nature itself, like just the fury of nature. And essentially there are two main kind of like beings that sleep beneath the earth that sort of influence a lot of these things. One is the inner dark, and the other is the green, essentially. And I'm sure there are probably other forces as well, but yeah. And there's a bunch of like ciphers, which is sort of the term for kind of like one-use items that give you some that are pretty powerful. That can also be sometimes situational, but that's where creativity comes in. You kind of like, you give these ciphers to your players, and they can find or artifacts or something like that, and they can find ways to use them and everything. You got like cards, you got like dulcimer, dolls, jars filled with some like rusty nails or something, and it's a ritual item and all that kind of thing. There's some like magic in here as well. Although it does specifically say like what is or is not part of the sort of like magic system. Like, there aren't any like magic wands necessarily, except for like dowsing wands. There isn't ritual clothing and so on and so forth. Um, let's see, and then of course you get the sort of bestiary towards the end here. They call it haints, spirits, and other revenants. And so here's where you get to some of the really uh, spooky things that you can run into in this alternate scary Appalachia. And I do recognize some of these creatures, like the Gray Ladies from earlier. They're most, if not all of these, do actually feature in at least one episode of the podcast. The Railroad Man. Oh man, the Railroad Man is such a cool character. Well, yeah, obviously because the podcast, this is like these are kind of like the first time that most of these are being drawn. There is the Witch Queen. She's a really cool character. Wolf Sisters. And there's also the thing whose name sounds like horned head, but is not. That's what this thing is right here. I think it's in here somewhere. But yeah, this right here in like episode 1 or like the prologue or episode 0.5, you meet the thing whose name sounds like horned head, but is not. And also the Witch Queen as well. Really, really cool characters. Then there's some adventures in here as well. I believe there's 2 adventures in here to get you started. And just like back matter stuff, resources, recommended reading. There's the Appalachian region, a cool map there, and there is a 2-sided poster. I'm not going to show this whole thing because basically this poster here is the book cover. So yeah, that deer creature, the thing whose name sounds like horned head but is not. And then you have a map of the Appalachian region. So yeah, just the map that we've seen elsewhere in the book. So yeah, because this book is so new to us anyway in our collection, I have not had a chance to either play in it or run this game, but I really want to. I really want to just sort of like run or play an adventure in this really, really cool world. I love the idea of sort of American mythology. America doesn't really have a mythology, not in the sense of like Norse mythology, Greek or Egyptian or whatever. I think one of the reasons for that is usually a like mythology doesn't like stick around if when there's like more traditional religions that sort of dominate, and that certainly did happen in America. And obviously there are certain like like beliefs of the native peoples of America and all that kind of stuff. But there isn't like one particular like mythology of America that I'm aware of anyway. And these people here from the real Appalachian region made this podcast, Old Gods of Appalachia, because they sort of lamented the fact that the Appalachian region specifically did not have a like sort of mythology, and they wanted to create something like that. And I think they did a fantastic job taking the legend and folk tales of their home region and making something truly unique to them. Kind of reminds me also of the concept of American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Gaiman or Gaiman? I think it's Gaiman. Apologies if I got it wrong. I'll admit I have not read American Gods, but I am aware that one of the concepts in it is that like American ideals, like American dream or like consumerism and things like that are sort of embodied in like deities or like beings and that kind of thing. I think that's really cool. Stuff, American folk tales like folklore, Paul Bunyan, Pecos Bill, the Ichabod Crane, and all kinds of things. I love that. That's I love when people get creative with those. So I'm very happy to have this, and I look forward to being able to more than just look at it, actually play with it, and have a lot of fun. I will also mention as a final note here, there is actually another book. There's another book by Monty Cook Games. There's another Monty Cook Games game that is based on a horror podcast that my wife and I love, and we pre-ordered it. So we don't have it right now. It's not coming until like late 2024 or something. But the horror podcast is called the Magnus Archives. It is bar none probably one of the best horror podcasts out there. The story is amazing. Um, for both Magnus Archives and Old Gods of Appalachia, I definitely would not recommend it to. It's not for the faint of heart. Both podcasts do get a bit gruesome at times, and pretty like they do delve into certain concepts of fear. But I love the way that they're written and the sort of the world that both of those have. So Monty Cook Games, who made this one, they're in the process of creating a Magnus Archives role playing game, and my wife and I are thrilled about that. So we pre-ordered it. They did a crowdfunding campaign online a couple months ago or something, and like earlier in 2023, and we really look forward to getting that book as well. So I might do a video talking about that when I do get that book. But I wanted to mention that too. Is like Monty Good Games is clearly on a roll with picking up collaborations with like top-notch horror podcasts. And making role-playing games out of them, which is really, really cool. I love it. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed. And until next time, all the best.